Hey guys, what's going on today? Well, I had a kind of a request about some simple power mods for these Diana chasers, so I thought I'm going to do two different videos. I'll do one kind of talking about those things, and then I'm also going to do a video about disassembly and reassembly of the gun. As you guys can see here, I've got this thing pretty well stripped down. I'm going to show you guys how to put this thing all back together. You notice I don't have the barrel removed out of the breech. That's because, let me set this guy down here. Here to focus. They have these little tiny O-rings on them. This is a spare barrel out on one of my rifle kits. And they got these little O-rings, and they actually come with extra O-rings because they get torn up really easy when you're pulling them in and out of the breech. So I'm not going to do that, but I will show you. There's 3 little set screws on top of that breech, which I'll show you here in just a second. So we've got these 3 little set screws. There's these 2 outer ones are shorter than this middle one. This middle one is the one that seats in that little nub right there. So when you get it put in there, just you pull the old one out, make sure you use like some kind of lube, some silicone lube or something when you're putting that thing back in. And just take your time and kind of work it back and forth, and it'll pop into place. And then you can take a flashlight and look. You'll be able to look down into this hole and see about where that little nub is. Then even if you just have it close, as you tighten that screw down, it'll center itself in there. It'll push itself into place. So anyway, so there's that stuff. Here's all the trigger parts. I do want to mention these pins. These little pins aren't held in by much. They're held in under tension when everything is together. And then even that, they're pretty easy to push out, even under tension. So when you do start pushing back on this trigger and stuff, it will relieve tension on something. They'll fall out real easy. So you be very, very careful keeping an eye on these. These 2 pins are the same length. This one that goes in the very back is a little bit longer, as you can see. This bolt here goes up through the tube and into the back of the breech there. It goes, it screws in right in there. Kind of helps pin the whole gun together. This little screw goes through there and goes into the top of this tube. That's also part of what holds the gun together. Here's your transfer port. It's the same on both sides. You can flip it either way, doesn't matter. Same size O-rings there. Bolt handle, hammer spring. This is the little screw that goes into this hammer when you're putting the gun back together. Now there's a couple of these that look very similar, but this one is longer, and this is the one that goes into your bolt, which will go, it'll screw up into here, which you'll see as I'm putting it back together. So here's the valve, both pieces. You got to pop it. Let's move that guy over here. Valve pieces. These are all stock too, guys. This is all factory stuff. I haven't modified this gun at all. So you got your 2 pieces of the valve, your spring, and your poppet. Now, this is where, when you tighten down your CO2, the tip of it sits down in there, and that's what pierces it. This little ring, if you take a screwdriver or something, you can turn it and it will come out. And then from the back side on the inside, the thing that pierces and the seal gasket and everything will pop out. I had issues. I had to order a new one of these from Bagnall Kirkwood, and I had issues getting this poppet to seat correctly and seal up. It took a while, so I'm probably going to have the same issue again when I put it back together and put CO2 to it, and that's fine. So there's nothing else inside here except for this stuff, and I'll show you guys how to put that back together. So I'm going to mount the phone in my tripod over here, and we'll start recording, and hopefully my phone doesn't fail. All right, guys, let's tear this thing apart. So, completely assembled. Start taking it apart. This cap, you gotta take. This guy's got to come off because to get your valve out, it's got to come off. So we're gonna get it out of the way. Now we're gonna take 3 or 3.5 millimeter. Forget again already. We're going to take this screw out. Oops. Turn that in the tin. Now at this point, guys, we can go ahead and separate the tube, breech, action, all that stuff from this little stock here, which can be difficult sometimes. Ooh. There we go. And we're going to pull apart like that. There, just like that. And we got this removed. This just pulls out. Nothing to it. Okay, so now, like I've said, you guys will see here a little bit later on, putting it back together, I talk about these pins. And you got to watch. Now watch, let's see if it'll do it. If I do that, of course it's not going to fall out. But they do fall out really easy, so I'm going to keep an eye on that. There's that guy. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to cock this, remove the single shot tray. I'm going to remove this little screw that's down into here. Like you're going to hear me say it several times in this video. I may have already said it. This thing strips really, really easy, so be real gentle with it. Should be a 1.5 millimeter, but my 564 standard fits it better. Now I'm going to close that bolt. I'm going to put the gun on fire. I'm going to fire it to take tension off of that hammer spring. Now we're going to flip this baby over. We're going to take this screw out, and you kind of hold it like this, because once you get this screw out, the whole thing, the upper is going to come apart from the lower. As you can see, it's split in there, and you got a transfer port and a couple of O-rings in there that you don't want to lose. So you pull apart. There's our transfer port. Here's the O-rings, like that. And pull them guys out. You're going to use something like a pick or something to get them out. Be careful with them because you don't want to mess them up. Throw those transfer port go in there. We got that taken apart. Now let's go ahead and finish taking this apart. I'm going to unscrew my bolt handle like that. Flip this guy over again. Same Allen wrench. There's that bolt that goes into the bottom of the bolt to help guide it. And it also, that's what comes in contact with the bolt that comes out of the hammer, which we'll see here shortly. This one, it looks like very similar to the one that comes out of the hammer. They both have this little O-ring, or not O-ring, but little brass bushing on them. But this one is longer than the one that goes into the hammer. So the hammer gets the short one. I don't know if you guys can see the wear right there, but that's from the two screw heads coming together. Because this will come in contact with the screw head that comes out of the hammer. And that's what cocks the gun and pulls it back. So I'm going to throw that guy in there. Now we can take this bolt out. That's pretty well torn apart. And I talk about later on about the barrel, why I'm not taking it apart. Okay, so let's get our valve out of this thing. Again, same size. Unscrew that. And like I said before, I'll say again later in the video, don't go crazy super tight. And you want them good and snug, but you don't want them super tight because it will, these, like this valve, these parts are aluminum. So, and with the valve, you'll see later in the video, it just comes apart, and I go over that. So, okay, now let's take our hammer and hammer spring out. Now this particular gun, this follower back here doesn't like to come out. And every other one I have, I was able to pull that out without too much resistance. Here's that one that goes on the top of the hammer, guys. You can see that's shorter. But for some reason, you got to kind of pound this one out. So you might run into that when you're doing yours. So, but this way you can still pull out your hammer and hammer spring through the front by going that way. There's the threaded part where your little bolt goes into. You know, so it only goes one way, guys. You'll be able to see that. I'm going to set that off to the side. So now we got that out. Like I said before, I use this, or you'll see later, sorry. I'm filming these in reverse, so So what I've done here is I'm just going to take this dowel, and it'll come in contact with the spring guide. I'm just going to tap it a few times here. First, I don't know why. Something's misshapen. I don't know if it's the tube or that or what. A guy could probably sand on this and make it fit a little bit better. But I don't intend on taking this gun apart a whole bunch. So here's your spring guide, and I call this the follower. I don't know what its actually official name for it is. There's a hole through it where it goes up through the tube and into the breech and holds that all together. So I'll throw that in there. Now we'll take our trigger parts out. That's where I'm going to use this little punch. I'm going to push on that one like that. Let that come out. I'm going to push on that one. It's actually already falling out this way. Like I said, guys, they like to fall out. And again, I'll talk about this later too. These two pins are the same length. They go here and here. And then your sear pin is longer. So this little pin goes through the sear, and it's the longest one. The long pin goes all the way in the back. Okay, so now this is completely disassembled. This part's welded, so you can't take it off. Here's the sear. This little spring comes off like that. Now you got your gun completely stripped down. So I'm going to start the other video of the reassembly, and I touched base on some different things. So I'm trying to keep this as short as possible. This is not going to be a 10-minute video, which I would have liked to have done, but that's the way it is. So, all right, well, moving on. All right, guys, so what I'm going to start with is the bolt. Now, obviously, when you are reassembling one of these guns, you want to lubricate things. Now, I did want to show you that this bolt does not have an O-ring on it like some of your guns do. I'll have the bolt right on there, or the O-ring. The O-ring that seals is inside here in the very back of the barrel. So if you ever have an issue with that O-ring, you can take these screws out and pull out your barrel and pull it out. You can probably, like I have a kit from Harbor Freight, I have two kits, one's metric and one's standard. You can probably find something in there that'll work. You might have to modify it a little bit, but it'll work. Finding this O-ring is probably going to be, that exact one is about impossible. You can't get parts for these things. I did just recently do a video on Bagnall and Kirkwood. They're over in the UK, and they have quite a bit of parts that they can get a hold of, but even they have a difficulty steadily getting a part supply on these. So anyway, so go check out that video. There's links if you're looking for parts for these. So pretty straightforward. Your bolt screws in. Now this thing has threads on both sides there, and the same thing with where the bolt handle goes in. So you can go in either way with it. It doesn't really matter. It's going to go up there and seat like that. Now I'm going to flip this guy over. I'm going to grab my longer bolt here, which is going to seat. Let's see if we can get it to sit. Oh, by the way, the tools you're going to need is, this is a 3.5 millimeter. Is it 3 or 3.5? 3.5. That's what most of the screws are. That little screw that goes in the very top, this guy right here, is a 1.5 millimeter, or to be quite honest with you, this is a standard. This is a 5/64, and it fits better, if you ask me. These little screws strip out real easy, so I think it actually fits better. I just think the machine tolerances on them weren't very good. So anyway, you can see this little screw, if we can get her to focus, has like a little brass washer on it there. Then you see it had some Loctite put on it. I think that was from the factory, guys. It's really hit and miss on these. I have 4 of these, and some of them have some Loctite, some of them don't. I got thinking maybe that was me, but I've never had this one completely stripped out. So we're just going to go ahead and try to get that started. Kind of in a bad position there. Sorry, I know it's off camera. I'm just trying to get it started. There we go. So I got it started in there now. Get this thing to focus. There. So it just screws in right there. And you guys will see it when you take it apart. So I'm just going to finish screwing that guy in. Make sure it's good and snug. And that's the longer one. When you take this thing apart, guys, you'll have that shorter one that goes into the top of the hammer. And then this little longer one that goes into your bolt. Alright, next thing we're going to do. Again, this guy had... I may have done that because these are notorious for unscrewing pretty easy. So I may have done that at one point. I don't know. Like I said, I got 4 of these and I'm always dinking around with them. So go ahead, just kind of hand tighten that guy down. So bolt is reinstalled. We're going to set that down. So the next thing we're going to do is, let's see here. We're going to go ahead and put the valve together now, guys, so you guys can see this. Okay, so we got our valve parts. We're going to take our poppet, like this. Drop it down in there, give it a little wiggle, and it'll come out. You guys can see, maybe. You can see that poppet sticking out there. That's what your hammer hits. Bop, bop, bop. And lets air up through the transfer port here and into the barrel. So we got our little poppet in there. We're going to take our spring and it just fits down over the poppet like that. And then this guy just goes together. Now every one of these I've had, when I put it back together, or when I've taken them apart, I'm able to break these apart just by hand. I did really tighten this thing down on the last video that when I took it apart to try to fix it. So I thought maybe that's where the leak was, but it wasn't. So there's putting the valve back together. Just kind of set it off to the side. Now I think we're going to try to... Now, as always, guys, you're not going to have your stuff laid out like I've got here. I always use pellet tins to throw parts in while you're waiting. So we're going to do that with these other parts too, just because I do not want to lose them. So I'm going to throw them in the tin. Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and put our trigger stuff back together. Let's get it out of the way. This can be a little bit fitty, but, and this is something else too, guys. You can take these things apart and polish, you know, the mating surfaces where they touch each other to smooth the trigger up a little bit. And also something else, in the back underside there is another little tiny screw right here. Oops, put it where you can actually see it. It's right here where you can adjust to get some more adjustment in your trigger. But in order to do that, you got to take the gun out of the, you got to take it apart basically to get to that. So I'm not going to mess with that today. I'm just going to put this thing back together. So, but you can polish those things up. There's this little spring here. It just sits down in this. You guys, you'll want to keep an eye on that because it'll get away from you. And this pivots back here. It's going to go all the way back. Now let's see if we can get it. Again, the longest pin goes in the very, very back here. Let's see. I get it lined up here. This stuff's always fun. There we go. Now, as you can see, guys, it just wants to fall out, so you really got to watch it. I'm going to try to kind of hold it like this. Now you can see that spring's in there. She's got some tension. Got some spring tension on it now. So now we're going to drop our trigger down in here like this. And then when you're adjusting that trigger, guys, if you ever see someone doing a video on just, this is where there's a little tiny Allen screw in here that goes up through, and that's the head of it sticking out, which will adjust your trigger. This other little screw right here is the mechanism that holds your safety in. That's something else I didn't take apart. If I recall right, there's just a little spring under there, maybe a little ball bearing or something. Pretty simple. There's really no reason to take that thing off ever. So Gonna put this guy in here. We can see we got a hole in the front. If I can get this thing picked up with my giant Shrek hands. Okay, so now you guys can see that. We're just gonna kind of keep moving it around, pushing down, wherever we gotta do to get that guy where I want it, and that was way off. And that'll happen when you guys are working on these. You just got to keep messing with it till it gets lined up right. It would be easier if I wasn't trying to make a video because I couldn't look. It's hard to look at what I'm doing. Come on. Let's see. Right there. Come on. There we go. There's one side. Now we get the other side to line up. There. Now the other side's through. You can see with the sears pushing up now, it wants to push that forward. I'm going to push this guy down. This pin doesn't go through anything except for trigger pack stuff on the gun here. Oops. Little tiny, easy to lose parts, guys. Come on. Once you get this guy in and you release this, you'll see what I'm talking about as far as tension. There we go. There we got her. So now you can see everything's under tension and don't want to fall out. Like when you're working on it, inevitably you're going to bump this trigger and this pin's going to go bloop. So you really got to watch that stupid thing because it likes to get away from you. Okay. Moving on here. Now I guess we'll put our follower back in. I call it a follower. This is the spring guide. Actually, we'll do the hammer spring first too. This is something else too, guys. You can pull these hammer springs out and polish these mating surfaces where it touches. You can put a lighter spring in, or a heavier spring here, lighter spring in your valve, and that will improve your performance. I'm going to do another little video on that stuff though. So the orientation of this hammer spring, you can see here, this is threaded, and that's where this other little bolt I was talking about is going to screw down into that to help keep it in line with our tube. It'll be down in there. So I'm going to go ahead, slide this guy in. Now, this is probably something I should have done before I put the trigger parts back together. Like I said, I'm probably kind of trying to figure it out as I go things. So here's what we're going to do. Because we got the other end open, I'm just going to go ahead and drop the hammer in from this side. It'll slide all the way down just like that. So now we got that. Let's go ahead and put our screw in there. It holds it in place, this little guy. Let's get that. Oh no, it goes in the back of the hammer. Like that. It's going to be, I really try to keep my videos under 10 minutes these days, guys, but it's just not going to happen with this video. So if you're curious on how to do this, you're just going to have to bear with me on it. Okay, so now we got our hammer back in. We can take our hammer spring, just kind of wiggle it around. It'll find its way. Now we're going to take a follower. Now remember, this has to go like this. The little tab has to be on the bottom. And you'll see that why in reassembly. There's a little notch in the very back and down in here that it sits down in. So we want to make sure it's oriented correctly. So you just want to try to get that as lined up as possible. And see, this thing's going to be as difficult going in as it was coming out, isn't it? I might have to tap it a little bit. Like I said, usually they just come right out, no problem. Got a little hammer right here. Let's get a little tap here. And if yours is being difficult like this one is, try to have this thing as lined up as possible, because when you go to put it back together, it can be a little difficult. So just to kind of test that, I'm just going to slide this guy through here. Yeah, it's lined up pretty good. So you guys can see what I'm saying. You want to make sure this is lined up. So now, as you can see, it's cocked now. That's what, when you pull back on this, that other little bolt catches this little bolt, pulls it back, and cocks it. Man, just fired it. Okay, so that all works. I got that back together. In theory, you shouldn't be able to do that without that bolt in there. But that's how stuck in here this thing is. It just doesn't fit quite right. Okay. Now we're going to move on. We're going to get our valve put back in. So let's get out our transfer port. And this is something else too, guys, at this point. When I go to put this back together, I'll show you here. I would put a little bit of silicone on each one of these. It kind of helps hold them in place, and it also, you know, just helps take care of them. So obviously the poppet end needs to go towards the hammer. You can see we got the two our holes there, and then we're going to line up with our transfer port here. So we're going to go ahead and slide this guy in, just like that. You can see it lined itself up pretty good. Not much adjusting to do. At this point, we're going to roll it over, and we have this short screw that goes in, and it'll thread into the valve, and it'll hold the valve in place for you. Just like that. Take a round wrench and tighten that guy down like that. Now our valve is sitting good and sturdy. It's staying in place. We're not worried about lining anything else up. I don't know if you guys can see right here. This is the little hole, that little tiny screw that goes through the top of this in through the breech. That's the little threaded thing that it threads into. Like I said, be really careful when you're taking that thing out and putting it back in. Make sure you got a good square bite on it, if you know what I mean. Don't, if you're at a little bit of an angle or something like that, they strip really, really easy. Ask me how I know. Okay, so at this point, I would probably put just a drop, either right on the O-ring or a drop down in there. You're going to push this guy down in. You want to use something, you don't really want to use anything sharp, but just make sure that it's seated down in there. Like I said, the oil kind of serves two purposes. It'll help hold it in place, and it's good for it. So I'm going to take this transfer port. Like I said, it's the same on both sides. I'm going to drop this baby down in here like that. Now we're ready to take our top half and put it with this guy. Now you can put this right up inside. You can put the O-ring up in here into the breech, or you can set it on your transfer port like this. I'm going to try it like that. We'll see. It's been a while since I did one of these. Another important thing, guys, this bolt, this screw into your bolt, can't even see it. This one has to be ahead of the one on the hammer. And I've done it before where I've had this too far back, and you put it together, and then you got nothing. You can't cock your gun. So you want to make sure that it's forward of that. And then we're just going to set it down on. You see that O-ring's wanting to move. We probably should have put it up inside there. So now at this point, we got her set together. It all sat down pretty square, so I feel good about it. I'm going to go ahead and put this guy in. Like that. Oop. Just did what I told you not to do. Didn't have a good square bite. Okay. Now it's back together. Now we're going to put our little tiny screw in. And I do it this way because now I can cock it and get that completely out of the way. Now, the single shot tray, as you guys know, or may know, is magnetic. So when you slide it in there, it just zaps right over, you know, to that magnet. One of the problems is when you go to put this little tiny screw back in, a lot of times it wants to fly over there, just like that. So you just got to kind of mess around, keep dinking with it till you get it where you want it. Walk it down in there. There we go. She's threading in. And like I said, it's, if you got T-handles, it'd probably be better for this. I don't have any T-handle set yet, but Just make sure it's good and tight. Don't go nuts with it, because man, you don't want to strip that thing. Now we can slide our single shot magnet. Close that up. Let's go ahead and fire it, just so none of that stuff's under tension while we're putting the rest of it back together. Okay. Now we're going to put our trigger guard in, and this part can be a little weird. Sometimes it's hard to get everything to go all together. I found, and I don't know if it's just the ones that I have, but having the gun off, having the trigger off safety, it seems to want to sit down in here easier than it does if it's on safe. So you got that off there. You got to set it at an angle, and you'll notice this trigger guard wants to fall out. So you kind of see, I don't have it right yet. There we go. Kind of hold on to that, snap it down in. That went really smooth. Sometimes you're going to fight them and fight them. It will go in. Like I said, just have your safety off. And it seems to work better that way. All right, now we're going to put this screw in. This one goes all the way up through and into the valve, which is nice. Help holding the valve into place. Tighten that down. Don't go super crazy with that either, because that valve is aluminum. Sorry about the coughing. And you strip it out pretty easy. So I'm going to screw this guy back in. Like that. Put our end cap on. Like that. That's it, guys. Reassembled. That's it.